Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So Antonia has a pretty significant life event coming up in the next few days. Antonia, you're getting ready to turn 40 years old, so it's a big birthday celebration for you. And often this mark in somebody's life is a significant mark because it marks somewhat of an exit from young adulthood and into more midlife. And there's a lot of changes that happen around this time period in someone's life. Time for reflection. It's almost like your life. I mean, your specific life isn't half over, but I think the metaphor, the meme out there is that around the 40-year-old mark, your life is about half over, roughly speaking. Yeah. Whether you live to 100 or not, that's about the mid mark. So I think a lot of stuff comes up, and we've been talking a lot in the last few weeks and the last few days about the significance of getting older, about life changes, about transferring or transitioning from one stage of life into the other. And we thought we'd have a free-form conversation today about some of the things that, in our lives we've thought about, we've learned, come up for us, and, have we made progress? Have you thought, Antonia, coming up on this special day for you, has it been a reflective time for you to look back into your past and go, okay, what lessons have I learned in the last 20 years or 30 years? So we thought we'd talk about that today on the Personality Hacker Podcast.
Yeah, well, and I'm getting here before you. Like,
That's right.
I'm almost a year older than you. So your birthday is October 6th, mine is October 22nd, and we just happened to meet because there's like a 2-week span in our year where we're the same age, because you'll have just turned an age that I'm just like turning the next age.
Yeah.
And we just happened to meet in that 2-week span.
You deceived me. I thought you were younger than you were.
That's right. You thought we were the same age. And then I turned a year older, and then all of a sudden we weren't anymore. So you'll be here soon, but it'll be next year. And so I'm coming up on my 40th, and I think I love the way that you framed this, because I think it was like a really nice, gentle way of saying, like, what are some of the things you figured out? Because I was actually directly asked to give my 3 major life lessons. Like, okay, so now you're turning 40. What are your 3 major life lessons? And I've been thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And I don't know.
Talk about pressure.
I know, like, I don't know what my 3 major life lessons were. And when I told you, Joel, I was like, so I'm thinking about this, like, thought experiment. What are my 3 major life lessons now that I'm turning 40? And I said, could we have a conversation? And you started out with, well, if you had to give Piper, like if you had 5 minutes and you had to give Piper like the highest leverage information you could give her about how to live her life, what would you say? And like my brain just froze. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I'd say. So what we decided to do is have a conversation around some of the biggies, like some of the major things that I can go back and sort of reflect on that have been pretty profound in my life. And at the same time, acknowledging that I don't know if I have any major life lessons. Like I've got some that have served me figuring out, and I think I'll share those. But as far as like these overarching do's and don'ts, I don't know. It might take another 40 years to figure out what those are for me.
That's fine. I have some thoughts too on some stuff I've gotten through, and I've learned along the journeys of life that, I think would resonate with you listening. We're all in different stages. We all have different things that we've learned and gone through. And I think some of those things can be helpful to others that are like, oh, yeah, me too. And sometimes it's not just like you may know a lesson. Like this happens to me all the time. There's stuff that I know in my head. There's things I think about, but I don't have words or good language for it. It's just kind of impressions or intuition or just thoughts that I've got, or even feelings. And someone will say something and go, yeah, in fact, that's really what I'm talking about right there. That's the point of something that I've been working on in my life. So I think that's helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I'm a bit hamstrung here, or at least I felt this way, because I was trying to go back into my life and think of like these major life events. And one of the challenges being an ENTP is that introverted sensing, or what we call memory, is my 3-year-old or inferior process. And so I don't actually have a lot of memories from my childhood, or at least I can't call them fast or quick. Like I kind of have to wait for them to emerge. And I've been noticing that since I've had Piper, like as she's aged, it's helped me recall memories that I didn't have access to until she reminded me of something, like something kind of struck me. And I went, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember feeling that way, or something that happened in my childhood. But without a totem, like my own child aging, without a totem, it's really hard for me to go back into the past and remember significant events. So I have to more think of results, like how have I changed as a person? And I think I think a lot of these quote unquote life lessons or the things that I've figured out in my 40 years are going to be a lot of things that we talk about on the podcast a lot because they're, as far as I'm concerned, game changers. And the very first one of those is don't outsource yourself to other people. Like, stop outsourcing yourself. Stop outsourcing your belief systems to the belief system that you grew up with. Like, ensure that is not just like, I just wanted to really make sure that this belief system was mine. So I did some, I did a little bit of, investigation, or went to a couple other, religious or paradigmatic institutions, and I'm pretty sure that this is right for me, or I reviewed the source materials over and over again, and eventually, like, I was able to, continue to see that thing through the lens of whatever I was taught, right? To stop outsourcing yourself to other people requires you usually to get some pretty serious distance enough so that all of the pieces of who you are that are grafted to that particular belief system or way of seeing things, that you start to see how if you changed how you believed, then it would fundamentally change who you are. And you're okay with that.
Yeah, and I think all these life lessons, quote unquote, are not static. How I look at it is almost like the trajectories or the tracks we're on as people. So, you've got a lot of different things that we experiment. When you're younger, you experiment with a lot of different ways of behaving, a lot of different types of things like, I learned never to do that thing. And then maybe you go a little bit further in life and you realize, that wasn't the actual thing that I shouldn't be doing. It was actually more like aligning myself on this trajectory, like trajectories and tracks of things. So it's more like a way of thinking about not outsourcing your beliefs or your life to somebody else or to other things outside of yourself. So that could be very on a really high level paradigmatic, or it could be that when someone asks you to bring a covered dish to the party and you know that that's going to put tons of stress on you, you don't like outsource your life. You don't like give yourself over to an outside source if you don't have it to give. Things like on a really micro level. It's all sorts of a sliding scale along that, like that theme, basically.
Yeah, or like something in the middle between a covered dish and, say, changing your religious or paradigm. Something sort of in the middle is when somebody asks you a question when you're young and you're like, hey, which college are you going to? Or what career are you entering? And you don't have an answer for them, thinking that you have to make one up or feeling the pressure that you have to follow this template. Like we outsource ourselves in 100 ways, every hour probably. We just hand ourselves over to the conditioning of our societies. And to some extent, we have to do that. Like, just the language I'm speaking right now means that I've been brainwashed and that I outsourced a big part of how my brain is constructed simply by having English as my primary language. And that means that my brain is going to be constructed in a very specific way that is, peculiar to how the English language, sort of sets our brains up. This is kind of a concept that is explored in the book Language in Thought and Action. So to some extent, there are parts of us that can't not be outsourced, right? And I guess I'm using outsource and brainwashing as kind of a similar concept. They're not exactly the same. Brainwashing is sort of the foundation of how you experience life and see things. And outsourcing is when you get to a place where you can start to basically brainwash yourself. Like, you get sophisticated enough and self-aware enough to start to take over the mechanism of brainwashing. And when you default to whatever it is that the people who are the most influential in your life around you say, you just sort of default to them and use them as your better wisdom, as opposed to your inner wisdom, use them instead of your inner wisdom, then you're basically outsourcing your identity, you're outsourcing your choices. And I think the reason why it's so difficult to not outsource is that we instinctively know that people will become upset if you choose to be loyal to yourself instead of to them. And that's what you're doing when you stop outsourcing, is you bring the loyalty away from them and whatever they believe, and you decide to be loyal to yourself. And that's scary because if we outsource our belief systems to other people, and we show loyalty to them, there's a couple of things that come with it. Number one, they'll like you more. And so you'll have more certainty of maintaining those relationships. And number two, on some level, they're responsible for your outcomes. You're not responsible for them because you made them the person who ultimately gets to decide how you're going to live your life. But when you bring that loyalty back to yourself and back to your inner wisdom and decide to not outsource those parts of who you are, now you're full responsibility for your life. And that can be really scary.
Yeah, to your point, we were watching one of our friends the other night, this show on Netflix. It's called Black Mirror. Great show. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. I would recommend skipping episode 1 of season 1 and just going straight to episode 2 of season 1 and keep going from there. It's a great show. It's about 45 minutes long, and each of these episodes takes a slice of maybe what life is going to look like in just the near future, 30, 50 years down the road. And this episode we were watching the other night was talking about, it was looking at technology in that what would happen if you could rate other people like we do Facebook posts, right? If you could put like 5 stars or give people a rating based on their interactions with you. So you're going through life, and as you interact with people, you're rating every one of those interactions. It would be
more like Uber.
Yeah, more like Uber. That's right.
Because I don't think we rate on Facebook.
No, we don't rate people, but like you'd like, or it's more like you're exactly right. It's more like an Uber or like a Yelp review or something like that.
And giving people like 5 stars if you liked the interaction with them, and you do it instantaneously with literally every single person you engage with.
Yeah, and so you start to rack up points, and your average approval rating, like if you were an Uber driver, you have, how many stars you've got. And so the story follows this young woman who is extremely anxious about her life because if you have a high score, it unlocks all sorts of opportunities for you. You get better rent, you have more access to better products and services in your life, you get, privileges and car rentals and airlines, all sorts of things happen if you've got a really high rating. And so it was really interesting to see the anxiety she had trying to make sure her rating stayed up. So she was driven by making sure she did all the right social interactions, had to always have a smile on her face. She didn't want to associate with anybody with a lower rating than her because it would bring her rating down. And you could just see how much outsourcing was going on for her in the social culture around her. And everybody's doing this. It's like a collective thing that the whole society is doing in this episode. Fascinating to see the anxiety and just the fakeness that people were putting on just to be liked and just to feel okay, in the world and get these really great ratings they can have online. So I think it's an extreme example. And what's really nice about Black Mirror is it shows something in the future with technology of, hey, this could be possible. But it really, I think, is a commentary on today.
I think the reason why that Black Mirror is so powerful is that the episode indicates that we get caught up in the game of life. And especially when you introduce things like point systems, now it feels like a video game. And games always have rules, and you're supposed to follow those rules. And if you follow the rules, then you'll get better points. And if you don't follow the rules, or if you can't optimize your character or the situation, then you lose, right? You either die and have to respawn, or you just get really poor points. And I think because life is effectively a game, we hand ourselves over to the scorekeepers of life and the point systems. Like I said something and a bunch of people didn't like it. And so I got a bunch of feedback that was not acceptable. And so I'm going to outsource how I feel about that to that person or that group of people. Like if they didn't like it, it must not have been good. As opposed to taking a moment to go, well, how did I feel about that? Do I stand behind it? Do I think it makes sense for me or it's right? Like what's going on for me on that one? And then being rigorously honest with yourself. I think this is the main piece of not outsourcing yourself to other people, is that you have to have your finger on the pulse of who you are. You have to really, really be in touch with that, with the person you're creating, the person who you're becoming. And I think that's probably the second thing that I've really figured out, is that life is not about what I'm doing, it's who I'm becoming. And I think those two concepts together, this idea of not outsourcing myself to somebody else, including my beliefs or my thoughts or my feelings, caring about other people, but not outsourcing myself, putting the responsibility on in their hands. And then recognizing that my life is not just made up of my activities. And it's not, that whole concept, I'm not a human doing, I'm a human being. But for me, I think I've realized that the biggest part of the game of life that I'm playing is that not that I'm a human being, but I'm a human becoming. Like I'm constantly changing. I'm constantly ever evolving. And my goalpost is always moving. The goalpost is always moving because as soon as I become one iteration of myself, it's not complete, it's not done. And so the goalpost moves again. So it's not really about accomplishing anything specific. It's about directing the process of who I become over time. And I think what's so powerful about this lesson for me, this quote unquote life lesson, has been that when we think life is a game to play to win, or if we believe that there are some specific things we have to accomplish, if we define success too narrowly, or if we think that certain things are going to make us happy if we can just get there, then we're constantly pushing living like further down the road. Like we're kicking the can down the road. Happiness, fulfillment, becoming the best version of yourself. We just keep kicking that can down the road, and that will happen once I've accomplished certain things. And I'm realizing that I can't kick that can down the road at all. Like I've got to have that be my daily experience. That is an ever evolving process. And the only success that I can ever experience is whatever is the success in the moment. So I'm becoming a different person all the time, and I have to recognize that it doesn't matter if I sit on my butt, do nothing. I'm still going to become a different person over time. Like the trajectory of time is not going to allow me to stay static throughout my entire journey. That just doesn't happen. I'm always going to become something a little different throughout my entire life. So I know I'm a human becoming. And also I recognize that I can only experience the moment. So as I become a different iteration of myself over time, I have to accept and enjoy the version I am right this second.
Yeah. I would say that's also something I've learned a lot, is this idea of becoming something. And I think for me, it's about the deep core resonance of, if I know that I am who I want to be, it really doesn't matter what I'm doing or how I'm doing it, because I'm center pointed on that person that I want to become. So I think that's really a key for me too. And I think that it brought up two questions that they're framed in my head. A question somebody asked me once, or posited this idea, and I can't remember the attribution, but if I do, I'll mention it. Someone said, do you see life? Most people categorize life into two major categories. Some people see life as a problem to solve, and some people see life as a game or an experience to optimize. And I realized at one point in my life, through my journey of growth, that I saw life as a problem to solve, something to get through. It was something, deferring life for the future. It was something like, I got to get through today just to solve this immediate problem and defer the maybe the experience that I want. And even in my religious paradigm, it was deferring the entire life to the afterlife. It was like, after I die, that's when my real life starts. And it was just a problem to solve. It was rooting out the stuff that was bad in me and all the different things. So I think that's something that I really came down to say, I want to switch that and look at life as something to be optimized, not something to be solved, or a problem that has to be like rooted out ultimately. And then I think something else, when I was younger, somebody told me, they said, there's no one sitting in a boardroom planning your life for you. It's not like there's this magical, group of people, executives planning your life for you. Basically that's up to you. And it kind of plays into this idea of deferring things to the future. What am I waiting for? Do I think that it's just going to magically happen? Do I think like someone's planning all that, or is it up to me to make that kind of thing happen? So I think those two, and so it's about optimizing my life, about making it experiential and optimizing it for the better and better and better experiences as I move through love, openness, happiness, joyfulness, things of this nature, not deferring that. And then realizing that there's nobody else taking care of that. That's on me. The responsibility for that is on my shoulders moving forward.
Yeah, it might sound like what we just said was almost contradictory. Like, you only experience the moment and who you are in this moment. And also, we recommend having your eye on who you're becoming, which would be a future iteration. And I think this is yet another life lesson, or something that's burgeoned for me over time, is this concept of trajectories. Getting yourself on the right trajectory. And so you can still future pace and know that you're on a trajectory to become the kind of person that you want to be, or you're continually becoming that person over time. It's, again, you don't kick the can, right? It's not a deferred thing. It's not like eventually you'll become the person you want to be. It's an ever evolving process where in the moment that you are right now, you feel good about who you are, because this iteration is perfectly acceptable as well. This iteration is fine, and also it never stays one iteration. So recognizing that the iterations will constantly be changing, then keeping yourself on a trajectory where you're happy with those results in the moment you're experiencing them, which is right this second. So it's both having a sense of presence, right now, right here. That's the only moment I'm really experiencing. And also recognizing that, I'm going to be experiencing a moment of presence in the future. Like when I get to that moment, that's going to be my presence now. And so making sure that I'm on the right trajectory, that I'm being thoughtful about my life and the person I'm continually crafting myself into and the kind of experiences I want to have. Like it means that I have to be thinking about those things, before I take off, right? A lot of times, or even course correct, to make sure that I'm on that right trajectory and I'm course correcting to that trajectory all the time.
As I shifted to thinking in terms of experiences, so there's this term called FOMO, right? FOMO, fear of missing out. It's this idea that whatever you're doing right now, you have made a choice to do, meaning you've excluded all the other choices of all the other possibilities. Now, I'm an ENFP. Maybe this is more of a challenge for me in my personality type. But I think a lot of people struggle with this. We have so many options. Like there's so many things happening. There's so many quote unquote parties to go to, so many exciting things. And with social media, there's that phenomenon which we tend to post all the highlights of our lives. So it appears like everyone's living these epic lives around us. And it might make us think, well, whatever I'm doing right now may not be that exciting compared to all these other people that I see on Facebook or on TV or whatever it is that the medium you're consuming this from, or even your friends just talking to you. You're like, oh man, just all these options. And I've really struggled with this fear of missing out, feeling like whatever I'm doing, that's not where the party is. The party's somewhere else maybe. And I feel almost like, oh man, I have an anxiety about where am I going to have the experiences I want to have. So as I shift into this experience mindset, now FOMO comes up for me. I start to fear, am I missing out? Am I missing an experience that would be better than the experience I'm in right now? And I've had to do a lot of work around this. And one of the things that I've learned how to do in my life, one of the life lessons I've pulled from that is, in order to get past fear of missing out, it's this notion, like the whole thing comes from this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side. That when you look over across the fence, metaphorically speaking, whatever's happening over there is better than what's happening right here. And I remember, it's probably over a year ago, writing in my journal late at night, because I kind of do some like introverted time and I just kind of journal late at night after everybody's in bed and asleep. It's my quiet time to reflect. I remember thinking about this idea of fear of missing out and like this idea of grass on the other side and how it's greener. I thought, no, the grass is greener on my side. And that's because I make it green. In other words, the way to beat this idea that you're going to miss out on an experience is whatever experience you're having, be present and be joyful and make it exciting. Find ways to make that experience. And I don't care what that experience is for me. This is how I've started to look at it. I want it to be the most epic thing going on the planet in this moment. Even if it's something mundane, if I'm cleaning house, I want it to be the coolest experience of anybody's having anywhere on the planet in this moment. And when people come into my sphere, I want them to have an amazing experience when they're in my sphere. The party is always here, basically. And I think that little shift has helped me lower the anxiety of missing out on experiences, has made me feel like I'm way more empowered to just rest into what I'm doing and be present and be happy and be joyful in the midst of that. So as you were talking, that came up for me to think in terms of switching from deferred life to experience. And then you're like, oh, but then you start to question yourself about the experiences you choose.
Yeah. Well, and you clearly make everything epic because living with you and our daughter, who I'm pretty sure is an ENFP as well, even though it's early days, is like living in a musical. You guys sing constantly, but it's like living in a musical that hasn't been planned for a year. It's like living in an impromptu musical where all the
with non-musicians,
like the singing is always off key and the words don't make sense and the dancing is clumsy. But it's like every moment you can tell that the grass is greener on your side because you're just having a blast. You're having so much fun. And you're tending to that grass, like you're nourishing it and you're watering it, meaning that you're pouring into your own life. Like you're ensuring that your life is going to be as good as it can be. And I always admire that, even though I have to admit, as an ENTP living in a perpetual musical, like every once in a while I just have to like go in the basement. I'm like, all right, guys, I'm going to go do something else. As much as I admire
I'm going to go play some video games.
I'm going to go play video games. I think that leads into, and I've only got like a couple more here written down, but of these life lessons that we're exploring right now. One of the big ones that came up for me, and it took me a long time to figure this out, and I think just the most recent Enneagram program actually helped me a lot in figuring out what was going on for me with this. But the life lesson itself is you can't want something more for someone else than they want it for themselves. And this was a big piece of what I would call my hero complex, which is if I saw potential in another person, I would do everything I could to try to get that potential to come out. I'd work with them. I think this is one of the reasons why I became a coach and did life coaching for years and years and years, because I was so invested in my clients and I really wanted success for them. And I realized sometimes that they just weren't ready. Even if they reached out, even if they were, basically handing over valuable money for these coaching sessions, that sometimes they just weren't ready for the thing that they wanted for themselves. And I couldn't want it for them more than they wanted it, right? Like I couldn't make them want to be at the place that they needed to be at. Like as in, like if it was just too hard, or if they weren't emotionally or psychologically ready for the work, or if they were further behind than they thought they were, or whatever the circumstance was, if I tried to help them understand where they were at and bring them up, then sometimes it was too much. It was just too much. And so, I'm sorry. Like I don't want to cut you off.
Finish your thought. Go ahead.
Right,
I was cutting you off. What do you mean? You're not cutting me off.
Well, you did the intake of breath. Which I always assume means that's like the podcasting cue that the other person wants to talk. So I just realized that it was actually more about me than it was about them. This desire to make them want their growth for them. And even not coaching clients, like people in my life, where I just really, really wanted them to see something that I thought would be good for them. And I realized, and this was the aha I had recently, even though I feel like I've done a lot of work around this over my entire life, and that was the conclusion I came to. That would be my pithy little saying. You can't want something for someone else more than they want it for themselves. And just let them be responsible for their situation and wherever they're at. But I realized that for me, this was me misdirecting. This was me projecting onto them success that I didn't want to have to work on within myself. Because if I could just be focused on everybody else's success and whether or not they were reaching their potential, I didn't really have to do any of the complicated inner work that made me tend to my relationship with success and what was going on for me and whether or not I was fulfilling my full potential, right? Like I could just sort of project that outward and have one degree of separation from that entire conversation, which was very uncomfortable for me. So the pithy life lesson statement is you can't want something for someone else more than they want it for themselves. And the subterranean underlying, new understanding around this or insight around this is, and whenever you're doing that, you're probably deflecting from your own inner work anyway.
Yeah, and I've seen it become super disappointing for you. I think that's what I was going to say earlier is I watched you do that with people in your life, not just clients or coaching clients, but people, friends, family, people that are in your life, and you have a vision for all the potential they carry, all the amazing stuff, and it's right. You're right. I can see it too. And then when it wasn't met either rapidly or the person couldn't see in themselves, you were disillusioned and almost disappointed in them. Like, can't you see how powerful you are? Can't you see how amazing you are in this? Or the potential you've got, like, don't you see that? And they're like, they've got their hangups too. And it would be frustrating and also disappointing to you. And it would it would put you in a place where you couldn't hold space for people. But as you've been working on this, you're much more, not that you were not generous with people, but you're much more generous with people. You give them a lot more space just to be who they are right now.
I think it's okay to acknowledge I wasn't very generous with people at that time.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off of them and you as well, like not being disappointed.
Well, and I realized it wasn't really about them to begin with. Like, and that, I think
Exactly.
I would piggyback off of like a little mini life lesson, which is that we don't, like everything that we experience in somebody else that annoys us or frustrates us or is not ideal is generally a projection of the thing we don't like about ourselves or at least around a topic we're avoiding. Like the more righteously indignant you get about other people's behavior, that's a really good arrow. It's like an eat at Joe's arrow, like one of those big flashing arrows into your own ego and what's going on for you that you don't really want to see about yourself. And it might not be that they're doing the exact thing you don't, that you fear is going on within you. It might just be that they're doing something that is in a wheelhouse of something you don't want to see inside of yourself, or it's a conversation. Like, if like you get really riled up about racism, it doesn't mean that you're a racist necessarily, but it could be that you are an elitist, or that you have some stuff going on inside of you that you're not, like, you are also being very exclusionary of people, and that's something you don't really want to, contend with internally. So you're projecting all of that behavior outward in order to try to understand what's going on, because it's a little overwhelming if you were to bring it in-house. And that is a major life lesson that I've experienced over and over and over again, that when I am the most frustrated with another person, it is generally because that's a conversation I'm not ready to have with myself. And I believe that taking full responsibility for myself and my ego has required me to basically use all of those as litmus tests. Every time I get triggered by something, somebody else has done, every time something like comes up for me, I just immediately go, what's going on for me? Like, what am I projecting outward that I need to have a conversation with myself around? And I would say that that's probably been, in recent times, like doing that, which we basically call ego work. That's probably been my number one life lesson, is get to a place where you can have a relationship with your ego, where you're nourishing it, you're giving it good, tasty meals of self-confidence and self-love, and all sorts of good, nourishing, tasty snacks that your ego needs. And then simultaneously recognizing when it's, when it's not serving you, when it's projecting something that's going on for you internally onto the outside world because it doesn't think it can handle it, or whatever it is that your ego is trying to do to protect you from what it thinks might lead to some sort of like, some form of death. So I would say my number one life lesson at the almost ripe old age of 40 has been, there's nothing that you can do that will substitute for making a good, solid relationship with your ego. And that's, for me, that's like having a good relationship with Antonia. Recognizing when Antonia is just doing Antonia stuff. Forgiving Antonia when she freaks out. Forgiving her when she's not at the top of her game. But then at the same time also kind of, recognizing that she can do better, and having self-confidence and the faith that she can go the extra distance. And also at the same time realizing that every time something feels like it's going to lead to death, that's Antonia trying to protect herself, and that's a really nice service that she's providing, but it's going to be fine. Like, there's no death at the end of this road, most likely. And just kind of chilling there. And I would say that I'm at a place right now of, I would say, joyfulness and the ability to just chill that I don't think I've ever experienced before in my life. Like, the whole don't sweat the small stuff, like, it doesn't even come on my radar anymore. And I think it's because I've been really attending to this ego work, which I know is available to literally every person.
That's hard won. I mean, it's not like something that was super... I'm hearing you say that, and I can imagine myself listening to this podcast going, "Oh, okay." But that's like you. That's a lot of work in getting through some of the stuff that you've gotten through in your life. It's not. I don't want to paint it as an easy thing, right? I mean, would you agree with that?
No, because I think the reason why it's not easy, it's straightforward. It's not easy. And
simple, but not easy. Exactly.
As all powerful things are, right? Like, the most powerful stuff is straightforward and simple, but usually not easy. And I think the reason why it's hard work is because every time you feel uncomfortable about something, that you don't turn away from it, you turn toward it. So every time something makes you uncomfortable, every time something makes you feel icky, every time something makes you go, ugh, you don't turn away from it and find a make wrong, like somebody else is doing something wrong, or somebody should be doing something else, or the society is wrong, or whatever it is, whatever your scapegoat is. You always turn toward it, and you look for the significance in yourself. You look for why it's making you uncomfortable. You try to figure out how you're contributing to it, and how you're like what is the dialogue within you, and how are you part of this? How is it that the discomfort is actually a big sign to what's going on internally for you, and how you're a part of the challenge? You're bringing that to the world in some way, and so that's really it's a painful work. Now, once you start getting in the mode of things, eventually it's such a liberating exercise that eventually you kind of get addicted to it. Like, every time something is uncomfortable, it's almost like an opportunity to go attend to that thing and kind of get rid of it. Because over time, it's like eventually your Zen is just at the highest levels of Zen. Like just nothing can ruffle you. I'm not there yet. I'm not unruffleable. I'm definitely at a place where on a daily basis, my ego has like a little tantrum of some sort. And then it's my job to turn toward it, right? And figure out what's the tantrum and own my place in it and figure it out and forgive myself for having the tantrum and then moving on to the next phase. But I think the reason why it's difficult is because it forces us to do something that is super counterintuitive, which is to go towards discomfort as opposed to turn away from it.
Yeah, because it can feel like you're literally dying. And I think we as humans are wired to, well, all animals, I think, are wired to try to avoid pain and death and keep survival. And if your ego feels threatened by something, avoidance, fleeing from that is one of the strategies that we can do, or hiding from it is one of the strategies we can do to make ourselves feel okay. So I think we all have life lessons for the life we've all lived. I mean, I'm sure our 5-year-old Piper has life lessons so far. Like, hey, I probably shouldn't do that, or I should do this, or here's why I'm thinking about this new thing in my life. If you're 15, if you're 20, 25, 35, 45, 55, 85, 100 years old, you're at a different place in your journey. And I think that's really the key, is it's a journey. It's not static. And we talked about that a little earlier in the podcast, but it is a process. It's a journey of life, and we're all in different parts, different paces, different timelines, different trajectories. And it's about, in my opinion, it's about getting on the right track and then, again, optimizing your life, optimizing the game of life to be the best version of yourself. And I think we've talked about that a lot here, but that's really what I think it comes down to, whatever that means for you. So you've been here, you've been with us, you've been listening in, you don't have a microphone on your side, but you are the third person right here on this podcast with us. I would love to have you come over to personalityhacker.com. Underneath this podcast, just put kind of maybe your age there. I think that would be a great idea. Put your age and then tell us maybe 3 life lessons or a life lesson you've learned. Tell us a story. Not just us here, but the whole community can benefit from hearing your story about what it is that you've learned in your life. Maybe you're at a transition age. Maybe you're getting ready to turn 20 or 21 really soon, or you're getting ready to graduate college, or maybe you're getting ready to retire your career and you're in your 60s or 70s. Maybe you're at the very end of your life and you've had some really big aha moments of, oh man, here's a lot of stuff I've learned over my lifetime. I think the community could benefit from your wisdom, your insight, and your personal story. So come over to personalityhacker.com, leave your age, leave your story. We want to hear from you. You can also join our community of like minds over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly giving, maybe a birthday present for Antonia, who's about to turn the big 4-0, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.